Good afternoon or good morning, depending on when you're listening to this, Year 10. Today we are going to be, or rather, sorry, this week, we're going to be looking at structure. So I gave you some Macbeth work, some revision work, going back over Macbeth last week. This week we're going to be looking at language. And now we're revising question 3, paper 1. Each week this half term we're going to switch. So 1 week we'll be doing literature, the next week we'll be doing language. Kind of trying to make it that mix and match that we have when we're in school, where we do so many lessons of literature, so many lessons of language. So I've gone with paper 1 question 3. Paper 1 is the one that you may have started to forget. We've been practicing paper 2, that's what we were working on most recently. So I want to get us back in to paper 1. I want you to start reviewing and revising, reading back through your notes. You've got your classwork books at home, use them. The reason I'm starting with question 3 is for 2 reasons. One, it's only 8 marks. So actually in terms of how much work we need to put into it, in terms of kind of the difficulty of the question, it isn't too much of a challenge. But at the same time, this is the one question that every single year I teach it, to every single class I teach it, this is the one that gives every student the biggest headache. And I don't really understand where the block can come sometimes. I think it's the fact that we practice so much looking at language in literature and in some of the other elements for the language papers that structure just seems to be too different. It seems to throw you out. So we're going to try and look at some tips, some cheats, some key things that we need to remember with question 3. And then we're going to, you are going to answer question 3. So, structure. Explain, comment on and analyse how writers' use of language and structure to achieve effects and influence readers using relevant subject terminology to express their views. That's the overarching element of AO2. Now, most of the work we really kind of focus on in AO2 is that language and that effect. But here, we're looking at the second part. We're looking at structure, but we still have to link the structure to the effects. If you don't link your structural analysis to the effects, you won't gain high marks. So, I want today's date at the top of that page. I want the title structure. I want the subheading, paper 1, question 3, revision. If you need to pause while you write that down, please do so now. I'm going to move to the next slide. Sorry, that took longer than I expected. I'm not good with IT. Any of you that remember that will know it well. So, what is structure? First of all, I want you to write down the definition of the word structure. What do you think that word means? I want you to write down your own definition, and then I want you to look up the definition of structure and write that down. What's different? What elements have you missed from that definition? Or did you really encapsulate what structure means? What we need to start thinking about is, what does structure means in terms of a text? So as you can see at the bottom of the screen, I have a picture of a house. That is because I think this is quite an easy way to really get our minds around how we think about structuring the text. So if you think about it, when you build a house, you don't start with the chimney or the roof, okay? You always have to start with the foundations. You start with that bottom section, because if you don't get the foundation right, your house will collapse. There's no point having a great roof, but you've got nothing to put it on. And if we think about a text, what would our foundation be? What is our key aspect? Well, our foundation is our protagonist, isn't it? Whoever our key character is, that is going to be the foundation. If we have a poor key character, if we have a key character that we don't really learn a lot about, or that the audience or readers don't really understand, then our story is going to collapse. It's not going to hold up, okay? There's no point putting all of these great plot twists or dramatic events like the roof, because there's nothing for them to hold to. The reader won't care about them if they don't believe in, if they don't know, if they don't understand that key character. So I think of our key character as our foundation. And then think about, well, what do we need to really get to grips with that character in their life or the moment in their life that they're going through? So that's the bricks going in, okay? That's when we start to get the windows, when we're looking into their soul, when we're really starting to see how their life works, what makes that character tick. And that's the different elements that the writer introduces throughout the text. So if we just start with one dramatic incident, but we've got no background to it, we're not going to have that emotional impact. Whereas if we start to get some background, we start to get some connection to that character, we start to learn about them before we get that dramatic moment, then it means more to us. Okay, so what's key here is that we look at the whole of the text. Now, I'm talking to you about the text without having the text. Obviously, this is very different to what we would do in class. You will know we would have read our extract first. And I am uploading the extract you will be using. So my advice would be at this point, I want you to read through that extract, okay? And don't just read the odd line. I want you to properly read the extract from the beginning to the end, okay? Because for question 3, it's the whole text. So, when you are considering structure, you are not looking at small units of language, but the big picture. But what you need to think of is, how is that text put together as a whole? So, what's the big picture at the end of this extract? What do we think about? What do we learn? What do we realise? What do we feel in regards to Alex at the end of this extract? Then you track that back, because that's your big picture. Right, now how did the writer make that happen? Who were we introduced first? Well, we're introduced to Alex first. Well, why are we introduced to Alex first? Well, one, he's our protagonist. Then start thinking about, how is that introduction made? In what environment do we see him? What's happening when we see him? What might that atmosphere or that environment or that moment or that experience hint at or suggest to the reader? How does it connect with the text as a whole? How does it build up that overall picture of Alex? So you go, right, this is the structure, this is the opening, this is what happened, this is the impact it had, and this is how it connects, to the text as a whole in terms of influencing our view and our understanding. Exactly like going back to, as I've got at the bottom here, the image of that house. Alex is that foundation. What are the first bricks that we're given to build on that foundation? And how do those first bricks help to shape and hold that house together? So, some useful structural devices to learn. I want you to write that as a subheading, and I know you're all going to moan now. I want you to note down these bullet points of the different structural devices to learn, okay? As those smart little detectives of you will notice, some of these are coloured in red. Now, I want you to either do the same, you write these particular ones in a different colour, or I want you to underline and star them, whichever works better for you. Okay, the reason I've put these particular ones in red are for 2 reasons. One, they're the easiest aspects in terms of structural devices to understand, to identify in a text, and to use in your analysis. 2, they are the ones that are most commonly used within, in useful ways that we could pull out and analyse in the different inserts that have generally been given in these exams. Looking at all of the different extracts and openings to novels that ACO have used in the exam so far, these seem to be the key elements of structural devices that are the most useful for you to use and get comfortable with, and really think about always questioning and identifying as you're reading these extracts. So I want you to pause it here while you note down all of those different structural devices. Then what I want you to do is I want you to go back and I want you to look at that extract, okay? I'm hoping you'll be able to print it out. If you can't, from the PDF, see if you can kind of screenshot it or copy it into a Word document so you can make annotations next to it, okay? So what I need you to do is I want you to look, okay, what is the opening? Make some annotations about that. What stands out to you about that opening? What do we learn? What's the atmosphere like? Then go and look at the ending. Is there anything that connects the opening to the ending? What is similar? What is different? Okay, is Alex in a very different position at the end to the beginning? Emotionally, are there particular connections? Is there a particular word or phrase? Is there a particular incident that connects that opening and ending? Or are they completely different? Or is Alex in dramatically different places? And if so, why? What makes that interesting? Then, where do we get any shifts of place? Go back through the text. Where do you see a shift of place? Identify it, highlight it, annotate it. Do we get any movements in time? I.e., do we have a flashback? Do we have a flash forward? If so, what happens in that movement? Why has the writer put it in there? Why is that specific? What does that tell us about Alex or about Alex's life? What impact does that have on us as a reader? I.e., what does it make us learn, think, feel, predict, realise? Introduction and description of character. Okay, now that may happen multiple times because we may meet more than one character. How are we introduced them? Are we introduced to different characters in different ways? Are they all introduced through narration? Are some introduced through dialogue? Are some introduced through action? How do we meet them? Do we meet them all in a very real world setting, or is there different ways that we meet these characters? Why are we introduced to different characters in different ways? Meeting these different characters, what impact does that give us? What insight does that give us to Alex? How does it develop our understanding and our connection to Alex as a character? Direct and reported speech. Okay, so that's really when we're looking at narration and dialogue and addressing the audience or addressing other characters. Repetition and circularity. So repetition is a very easy one to spot. Any key ideas, any key motifs, any key symbols, any key colours, any key particular words or phrases that we see coming up. Because don't forget, this is only an extract. So compared to a whole novel, it's a relatively short, not relatively, it's a very short amount of writing. So if we've got key phrases being used from the beginning and then somewhere in the middle and then somewhere at the end, that's quite a lot of repetition within the span of a whole novel. So that's key to make a note of that. If you can identify patterns in terms of colours, in terms of repetition, that really helps to elevate your grade. In terms of circularity, this is most applicable linking back to openings and endings. It doesn't always happen, but what quite often you'll find in the extracts that AQA choose for this paper is that they have what we call a cyclical narrative. So there's an element from the opening that is readdressed right within that closing. Now it may be a particular movement, it may be a particular location, it may be a particular emotion a character's in, or it may be a particular action. But that gives us that sense of this extract coming to an end, that sense that we've come full circle, we're back to where we are. It makes it seem kind of tied up and condensed. That's really what we're looking at when we're talking about that circularity. Change of perspective should be easy to identify. Okay, so are we starting off by having the perspective of one character and then it shifts to the perspective of another character? Do we open with the perspective of the narrator and then we shift to the perspective of a character? Okay, how does it change? Change of perspective can come through characters, but it could also come through changing our environment as well, where we've got to change perspective in terms of the perspective of our character has changed because their environment has changed. Authorial voice, in terms of that kind of narrative voice. Who are we getting the story from? How? Why? What's the impact of that? Use of contrast in situations, settings, characters or themes. So this can be used very well. We can have very contrasting characters to highlight something specific about our main character. We could also have contrasting settings to make us again learn more and see how our character reacts in very different environments. It gives us a real sense of a rounded idea of that person. We understand how they would react in any situation because we've seen them in these very contrasting environments. And then we've got the climax and the anticlimax. Okay, is the extract feeling like it's building to a crescendo? Is it coming to a climax? Is there a sense of tension that builds throughout the extract, but it turns out to be an anticlimax? Why might the writer be doing that? It's always worth bearing in mind that you're looking at the extract as a whole, but you're also aware that the extract is only a part of a much bigger whole, because the extract will always come from a novel. So it's worth acknowledging that the anticlimax could be because, you know, while this is an extract in its entirety, it is actually part of a novel, and the writer is kind of building and creating a sense of pace and creating that sense of suspense for the reader that's going to continue on throughout the text. If you still need longer to note these down, please pause here, but also, to be fair, you need to be pausing here anyway because you need to go back, you need to go to the extract, back, because you should have already read it through once, and you need to start annotating, identifying these, making these notes. You can replay this section of me talking through it while you do that if it helps, or just pause it so I'm shut up and you get on and annotate. So, question 3. What is the examiner looking for? Now, at the moment, we're not being examined. We're only year 10. But we have to be very clearly aware every practice we have is getting us ready for that examination. So when I mark this, I will be marking it as an examiner, i.e. I'll be marking it with the mark scheme for the exam in my hand. Okay. Now, as you've been told already, nobody's getting an official grade. Okay, this isn't going on your Go for Schools because this isn't the same environment as we would normally be in to be doing this. Okay. But I think it would be useful for you to get a mark out of 8 for you to see where you're sitting in terms of that grade. Okay. Again, I'm not going to be recording these. This isn't going to be getting logged. This isn't going to impact where you are next year or anything like that. If you're worried when you're doing this and you feel a little bit anxious and you think, I really don't want to know my score out of 8 for this, then send me an email and I'll make sure that I don't put a mark on your one. Okay? But I do think it'll be very beneficial for you to get a sense of going, right, how many marks do I still need to try and get on this? Or actually, if I look back at what I got the first time I did this, how well have I improved? Okay, so paper 1, question 3. It assesses AO2, in this case, how the writer has structured a text. So it's asking you to explain, to comment on, and analyse how the writers use structure to achieve effects and influence. Now again, you'll see that I put achieve effects and influence in red. That is because if all you do is comment on and analyse the structure, so you identify what structural choice is made, you give me some analysis to it, and then you move on, you're not going to be getting very high marks. You have to link that analysis to the effects it achieves. What impact does it have? What does it make us learn, discover, realise, think, feel, predict, and the influence? How does it influence our understanding and our opinion of Alex, of that key character, okay, or of that environment? Candidates are using relevant subject terminology to support their views. Well, you've just noted down a whole PowerPoint's worth of different terms that you could use, and they're all terms that will be accepted and come into play in terms of looking at structure. So, as per the mark scheme, structural features can be at whole text level, including reference to the beginning and ending. Now, I've said this to those of you that I have in class. I'll say it again. I'll probably say it multiple times, to be honest. The best way to do this is to break question 3 up into 3 paragraphs. Paragraph 1 is exploring the opening, the beginning. How does it open? What structural choice does the writer make? What comment on that? Why do you think the writer's made it? Analyse it. Tell me the effect and the influence on it. Then find something that shifts somewhere in the middle. Now, it doesn't have to be the dead centre middle of the extract, but somewhere around that middle, and I don't just mean like the next paragraph on, I mean further into the text, where do we get a perspective shift? i.e., do we get a shift in setting? Do we get a shift from narration to dialogue or dialogue to narration? Do we get a shift because suddenly we meet new characters? Do we get a shift because the atmosphere completely changes? Do we get a shift because we get a completely different perspective? Is it somebody else telling us the story now? Or is our character, have they changed their perspective and they're now focusing on something completely different? Where do we get the shift? Why do we get the shift? How has the shift been introduced? What effect does it have? And what influence does it achieve? And then your third paragraph is to do that for the end. Go and look at the ending, okay? Because then you can either come up with really nice contrast between the beginning and the ending, or you can look at, like we said, a cyclical narrative. Where do we identify that cyclical nature, that cyclical structure between that beginning and that end? And again, you're doing exactly what you did with the others. You're commenting on it, you're analysing it, you're identifying what effect it achieves, and you're exploring the influence it has on our understanding and connection to that protagonist. At paragraph level, I've just given you a little bit extra here that you could think about. Look at topic change. Look at aspects of cohesion. How has an idea been cohesively presented throughout a paragraph? And at sentence level, when it contributes to the structure as a whole. Now, if you're not very confident with question 3, I wouldn't go into looking at the paragraph level or the sentence level just yet. Look at it as a whole, get confident, get that developed, and then when you're looking to up level, when you're looking to move on, you can start thinking about that paragraph level and that sentence level. If you're already very confident with question 3, then start challenging yourself. Start seeing where you could identify structural changes in terms of that paragraph, topic change, aspects of cohesion, and looking at sentence level when you can then link that sentence level to a point about the structure as a whole. Okay. Here is your question. Don't panic, we're not ready to answer it just yet, but I want you to be very clear on what the question is. So, you need to think about the whole of the source. Remember, we're looking at the source as a whole, but we're going to break our answer down into 3 paragraphs, focusing on the opening, something, somewhere that shifts in the middle, and the ending. The text is taken from the beginning of a novel. We've already said that. Now the question, how is text structured to interest you as a reader? Interest, that's the key part of this that relates to that effect that's achieved and influence. Okay, so structure, that's how is it put together? How has it been developed? What decisions has the writer made and put where? Interest you is why have they put that there? Why did they make that decision? What effect, what impact does that have? And how does that influence us as a reader? That's what you've got to remember. You're doing those 3 elements in every paragraph. Every time you're identifying a structural piece, they're the 3 things you're thinking about. Wherever an exam question says you could write about, mentally, scribble out the word could, it should. Okay? They're not trying to trick you. These prompts are there to guide you. They know that being in that exam is stressful. They know that it's easy for you to lose and forget what you know about a question. So they're trying to prompt you and direct you to help you if you start to have that little brain freeze. So what the writer focuses your attention on at the beginning. Easy. Straight away, we open with that. That's our opening paragraph. How and why the writer changes this focus as the source develops. That is saying where in the body of it, where in the middle do we get a shift? And pick a shift that's dramatic. Pick a shift that really teaches us something, that really gives us a new sense of either that character or that environment. And then any other structural feature. I would always say the end. Okay, that's what your third one should be. Okay. Now, this is a nice little easy way of breaking down the question for you. This is how AQA themselves break this down for the examiners. So, question. You need to think about the source, let me try reading. You now need to think about the whole of the source. So, what does that mean? This part of the question will stay consistent each series. That means Every exam will always have that phrase in it. It reminds the students to make reference to the whole source. They put that in there to remind you that you have to talk about the fact that this is the extract in its entirety. Okay, so you link back for analysis to the impact on the overall source, not just on that one paragraph. Now, the text is from the beginning of a novel. This part of the question provides a context to where the source is taken from within the novel or short story. Okay, so that's minimal. It's not that much we need, but as long as it tells us it's from the beginning, that's something we can address. The fact that we're being introduced to these things because we know it's at the beginning of the novel or short story. How has the writer structured the text to interest you as a reader? This part of the question will stay consistent in each series. Again, that means this phrase will always be used. Here we go. The phrase interest you as a reader allows students the freedom to choose from their own examples. So it means it gives you the opportunity to decide, well, what are the interesting structural choices the writer's made? What is interesting about the opening? That's the thing I'm going to pick. What is interesting about a change in the middle? That's the thing I'm going to pick. What is interesting about the change or the link back at the end? That's the thing I'm going to pick. And you could write about. So this part of the question will stay consistent in each series. In an untiered assessment, the bullet points can offer additional support if required. So exactly what I was saying, that's there just to help and guide you if you start to get a little bit panicked. So, approaching the text. This is where you're going to start building on those little annotations and structural notes that you've made on your extract already. So, having identified the structure of the text, you need to ask why the writer has chosen to organise their ideas like this and what effect it creates on the reader. So, how does it begin? Do we get characters, settings, events, or a combination? Okay, look at that. Look at that opening paragraph. What happens? Who do we meet? What's the environment? Is the character and the environment both really interesting and important in that opening? Okay, why? Why is that combination being used? How does that relate to everything that we learn about Alex? How could that be symbolic or metaphoric of his emotions or his environment or his thoughts? How does the beginning try to engage the reader? What would be interesting about that? What's the hook? Okay, why has the writer opened with that? What does that immediately make us ask or question or wonder about Alex? What kind of atmosphere? What effect is created? Remember, we've got to keep linking to an effect. This structural choice has created an effect. What effect is it? Okay. And then, what happens in the middle and how does this build on the opening? Where do we get a shift in the middle? Where do we learn something in the middle that could be key, that links to what we've discovered in the opening? Think about what happens in the opening. Think about what Alex is doing. Think about what's happening to Alex. Think about the specific details of that nightmare. How could that connect to anything that we learn later on in the source? How does that moment in the kitchen with the siblings, how does that connect? How does that build on what we're seeing and learning about Alex? Is there a key phrase or sentence? Is there something that stands out? Is there anything that's being repeated? Is there anything that makes us really learn something important? And does this piece of text reach its climax? How do you know? Okay, is there a climax at the end of this? What makes you believe it to be a climax? Why do you think that? How does that affect us? What influence does that have on us as readers? Oh, sorry, I clicked the button when I didn't mean to. So, what I want you to do is I want you to pause it here and I want you to go through that. I want you to annotate in detail. The more work you put into your annotation, the easier you are going to be able to find actually putting together the answer of this question. Because when you're sat there and you have to write in detail and write these 3 paragraphs, that suddenly feels a bit like, oh my God, I don't know where to begin. But if you've given yourself really clear, detailed annotations, then really all you're doing is putting all of those different ideas together and connecting them, okay, and developing those points. So So the more work you put in now, the easier the end task is going to be. So pause it here for as long as you need. Get those annotations done on that extract again. Like I said, if you can print it, brilliant. If not, see if you can screenshot and copy it into Word and annotate around it. So, consider key questions of the text. Possible key questions move from the what to how and on to why. They could include. So I'm adding this in for anybody that's getting a bit worried about how to do the effects, how to think about the influence. This is another way of thinking about it and breaking it down that might make it easier for you. So when I start to read the text, what is the writer focusing my attention on? Okay? What stands out to you? When you read that first paragraph, what's the key thing that draws your attention? Highlight that, annotate that, and make a note on that. And then, how is this being developed? Within that, what happens in connection to it? Is that one specific moment, or does it get built on? Do we learn more about it? Does it give us an insight to something? Does it connect to anything later on in the text? What feature of structure is evident at this point? Could we talk about a perspective? Could we talk about an atmosphere? Could we talk about an environment? Could we talk about the character that we're introduced to? Okay. Could we talk about a time? And then why? This is the one that's really going to help you with that effect and that influence. So why might the writer have deliberately chosen to begin the text with this? Why have him having a nightmare? How does that connect to what's happening in his life? What could be symbolic within that nightmare? Why has the writer chosen that to be the opening? And therefore make use of this particular feature of structure. Okay, so if this hasn't helped, ignore this. This is just an extra little thing to try and help you if you're struggling to think about the effect and the influence, okay? If this doesn't help with that, then ignore this slide, that's fine. This is continuing on that same kind of idea. So what point of focus does the writer develop in the sequence after the starting point? So number 5 is just that prompt that gets you thinking about that middle section. Where does this kind of develop? Where do we see a change? Where do we see elements that's introduced in that opening, but we see them being developed and changed and altered, okay? What structural change has been implemented here? How is it being developed? Why is the writer now showing us this thing from a different angle, this different aspect? How is each being developed? Is this through a shift in perspective? Is it through a shift in place? Is it through a shift in time? Or is it through a shift in technique? Still thinking about where we get that change in the middle. What's being developed and how is it being developed? Okay. What is the structural means of that development? Okay. Remember, perspective, place, time, or technique. They're the key things you need to be asking yourself. Why is the writer taking me through this particular sequence? That's again thinking about that effect and that influence. Why have that scene of dialogue with the siblings? What different side to Alex does that show us? What does that tell us about his emotional state or his mental state? What does that suggest about the family as a whole? Okay. How does that influence our understanding and our connection? What impact and effect does it have? And that links in with number 8. How is this specific to helping the reader discover or understand an important aspect? Now, we're introduced to Alex on his own at the beginning. So Alex is our important thing. So it's what do we discover or understand about Alex through this change, through this difference, through whatever this shift is that we've zoomed in on. And what effect does it have? So what does it help us understand and what impact does that understanding have? And then what does the writer focus my attention at the end of the text? Remember, I've always said that third paragraph should be the ending. What changes there? How is this developed as a structural feature? Okay, what structural feature comes into play here? And then to end it, how am I left thinking or feeling at the end? in relation to what our important element is, in relation to that foundation, in relation to that protagonist. How are we feeling? How are we thinking? Does it feel like it's been wrapped up? Does it feel anticlimactic? Does it feel like we've got to the climax? Does it feel like we don't know what's going to happen next for Alex? Think about that. Okay, so here is the question. I want you to write the subheading question 3. The two sentences at the top of the screen, I want you to write them down. And then the question, the single sentence question underneath that, I want you to write that down. Everything that you could write about, those bullet points, you don't need to copy those down. Everything above the bullet points, I want you to write down in your classwork book. I want you to underline question 3, and I want you to underline the question. How is the text structured to interest you as a reader? Okay. Now, remember, you should have annotated your text in detail. Okay. You've got the extract. 3 paragraphs. First paragraph, giving me your structural analysis and that what is the structure, what are the structural decisions made, how do they affect us, what influence do they have, what do they tell us about Alex, where do we get a structural shift, somewhere in the middle. How does that develop our understanding of Alex? Why is that particular structural shift being used? What influence does that have for the reader? And then the same for the ending. Okay. Now, in the exam, you should only be spending 8 minutes writing this. Obviously, you're a little bit out of practice with question 3 because we've been working on paper 2. Okay. So I want you to spend writing this. Ideally, I want you to spend a maximum of 20 minutes. 3 paragraphs in 20 minutes. If you can get this question answered in 12 minutes in detail, still using 3 paragraphs, that's brilliant. Okay, but if you need longer while we're out of practice, that's fine. Take the 20 minutes. Okay, try to make sure you don't go over 20 minutes because we've got to get working on bringing that time down. Okay. I hope you will have a thoroughly exciting time answering this question. If you get stuck on anything, if you've got any questions, please email me. Okay, this is going to be due next Thursday. Okay, since Easter we've kind of moved our days, so we're doing it on a Thursday now. And have a lovely Friday. Enjoy your weekend, and I'll have either another YouTube tutorial for you or some more work on GCSE Pod next week. Thank you. Bye bye.